I should say good afternoon maybe. I think both myself and the previous speaker are going to speak about things which are rather intangible. I think Brent said it was it honey or money or funny? I can't remember. But I think your taxi driver was probably a philosopher or a part-time taxi driver, because Aristotle many hundreds or perhaps millennia ago said that architecture and built environment is to do with three principles, and they call it the Triadic principles. And every built environment or building or structure has to conform to these three principles. One of them is commodity. That means it has to be able to accommodate human needs, nature. It has to be firm, so it is commodity firmness. It has to be built solidly, and for durability and sustainability. And it has to provide delight. So commodity, firmness, and delight has been the dictum of architects for many generations and people who deal with the built environment. And the thing that really gets lost in the frenzy of percentages and affordability and cash value investment, longevity of asset, etc., is dignity, beauty, and humanity. And I think livability has got a lot to do with how many bathrooms you have, but not got a lot to do with how many bathrooms you had, but how dignified your existence is within the environment you live, and how beauty is present where you live. What we've been talking about this morning really reminded me of a group of people who are trying to basically apply battlefield medicine to a scenario where a painful death is going to be made as tolerable as possible by trying to retrofit things and come up with solutions that alleviate the current modern urban environment. Sustainability has been unfortunately reduced to greenwash, what we term greenwash, which is a kind of a counter thing on whitewash, where buildings which are inherently, as somebody called it, time bombs internally, where their internal structure has been built unsustainably, are given an extra lease of life, the kind of injection Dr. Frankenstein administers to monsters so that his sort of eyes pop up and generate electricity, which can be sold on the grid, probably. And worse than that, I know, Gunther, this is no disrespect, but to German or Germany, Bauhaus and the Bauhaus ideology was probably the biggest ideological party responsible for the destruction of the traditional European city. Every housing estate, vertical ghetto built in the Western world and repeated and looked at paradigmatic by the Eastern world, by Eastern Europe, and wanting to be replicated, was based on Bauhaus ideology of point structure, high-rise, low density. Traditional cities where people inhabit, thrive, are low-rise, mid-rise, high-density places where mixed use is encouraged. People live, work, die, as somebody said, in their houses, and they are able to walk to the places they work, they live, they don't depend on technology of lifts. So that was kind of my sort of retort to what happened in the morning. What I want to say is that architects and urban planners need really to as people who create places, are faced with the issue of choice and also sensibility. The way we are educated and think about places is like this. It's really the kind of, this is a web page of a very famous, world famous architect who shall be nameless. And this is the kind of strap line to the image. It says we are guided by the sensitivity to culture and climate of place. One very quick look at this image shows you that you are probably in a very cold country where there's a lot of chimneys, people build in stone or have built in stone for millennia, and they have lead roofs. It probably rains quite a bit, so things need to be washed down, cleaned down regularly with the dust. And then that is the response. And that response is supposed to be guided by sensitivity to this environment and the culture of the place. So where we build and how we build has become almost irrelevant because of the global resources which are at our disposal. So in this kind of environment, maintaining a rigor and being able to create places which are livable and human is really quite a challenge for architects. And architects have had to adapt. So from the attributes of an architect, which was to work with natural materials, with rulers that really describe the human length, breadth, manageability, about the number of floors one could walk up, and the beauty or the statics of structure, to really being able to see how reinforcement and concrete can work. And so the shift really has been changed from a kind of a nature human-based, which is really directed again, very directly connected to livability, to a machine, to a technological paradigm. This is a very famous sketch of Antoine Logier, who basically is architect, which is the infant, the kind of fat little cherub, being pointed to nature as provision of shelter, which is really the prime requirement of architecture. So a nature-based approach is human-centric, not machine-centric. There is obviously now a concern about sustainability, about being green, and what has happened is that although both the nature-based approach and the machine-based or the industrially produced-based approach of the high-rise glass and steel share the same kind of concerns, one doesn't say that the modernist architect or the urban planners are not concerned about that, is that their approach is quite different. One is about retrofitting and continuing with the ideology of sustaining what one is doing, and the other one is about a complete shift in paradigm. And I think this shift in paradigm is really what is necessary as a kind of a revolutionary shift in the way we conceive of our environment and of living. Of course, we are lumbered with the disposable production of the last 60 or 70 years of urban planning and architecture. And there is very valid solutions that needs to be looked at about retrofitting these. But I think we need to long-term think about complete destruction of that stock, as it would go away itself naturally in any event, but being able to legislate for it. So you will see that the modus operandi today is about superimposing a technological paradigm onto an already handicapped object in order to extend its life. We build for height, speed, and expediency, but they still apparently somehow end up conforming to some ecological standard, which everybody says, fantastic, wow. And we go on. The nature-based approach is really more about the evolution and how things move forward. So a house built like a machine with industrial materials is basically requires the maintenance of a machine. It requires the sensibility of use as a machine, and also a machine cannot be cannot provide a livable human environment. It's good for going from A to B, or climbing to the moon, or climbing to the top of a mountain, or flying off to the moon. So the traditional urban environment and architecture work to the contingency and limits of neighborhoods and human scale. The architecture of it is not really born out of a purely stylistic approach. I mean, these are basically all the same kind of structures. They're just kind of dressed differently. And what happens, though, is that when you continue working in this kind of mode, nature always has a way of exacting its revenge, either in terms of climate change. I mean, the building industry is the most carbon-intensive and responsible for CO2 emissions on planet Earth. Yet everybody is pointing towards cars and petrol, use of petrol. Whereas if we were able to change the way we build, then a lot would be different. I think one needs to explore these ideas further, because the other aspect of a non-machine-based, a more nature-based, therefore more human-based, human beings by extension have traditions, they have customs, they have communities, they live in communities. A lot of things follows. We're faced today where if you didn't have the captions under each of those cities, you wouldn't know where you are. There's no sense of identity, there's no sense of community. These are machines which are exported from one country to another. You can, buy a Rolls-Royce, which is now owned by Germany, I think, in England, and you can take a Volkswagen to Brazil and manufacture it there, etc. And you can create technological environments which could be completely alien to their surroundings. You could have a ski resort in Dubai, where you even have a chalet where you can have hot chocolate at the top of the slope, and you could even break your leg, but your exit out of the piste will be less dignified. You won't be carried by a helicopter. You just get pushed on on some trolley on the tradesman's exit out of the shopping mall. We have to start believing that modernity is really a qualitative, not a chronological category. To be modern, to be new, is not to do with the next new thing. It is to do with living with quality. Living with something that's proper and human. Architects, unfortunately, have a very kind of a linear way of looking at history and how things are. The approach of vernacular and traditional architecture is really something that kind of dislodges you from the circle of invention and repetition. So you can see here, really, things are just getting even more crazy in a search for newness and modernity, where people are expected to look out of the windows kind of sideways. Once human beings invent something that's human, natural, I would say, there's really no other words. Nobody puts a sixth or a fifth wheel or a wheel going sideways on a motor car. But actually, when it comes to a building, it's a free game for everybody. You can actually propose whatever you like, and it will be just as valid. So really, I think to make our environment more tolerable and livable as spaces, we need to go back to the people. I think that's what we need to do. We need to stop ticking boxes. We need to stop measuring, U values. All of those things are actually quite valid. Sustainability is a social issue as well as a built environment issue. And I think there's an organization in the UK called Create Streets, which is actually a kind of a self-organized, community-based organization. And they had some very interesting results when they canvassed opinion about where people would like to live and how they would like to live. And they showed these images to the kind of pop-up poll which they had. And it showed that really most people wanted to live at a kind of a human-sized place. Almost like 86% of them wanted to live in either an Edwardian mansion block or something like the proposal which they were trying to create as a counter-proposal to something that was similar to that. Nobody, surprisingly, wanted to live in the Shard, which is the most celebrated building in Europe at the moment. And you can actually see that the percentages that supported it, they wanted conventional, medium, or low-rise buildings to be built near those who were completing the poll. And a very, very small percentage wanted to live in what is, by architects at least, and urban designers, considered to be highly desirable. And actually, if people don't want it, they're mad, actually. There's really no other reason that they are rejecting this kind of thing. They're either uneducated or mad. And in other surveys that were carried, really, in terms of occupancy and tenancy, between the censuses that were carried out in the UK some time ago, in 2002, as opposed to in 1967, 89% of the people wanted to actually live in a house. none wanted to live in a tower block. And only 2% wanted to live in what is called a modern apartment block, and these are like 10 or 15-story blocks. And residents, not only that, in terms of the environment they live in and the livability issue, is that none of them wanted a tower block built near them. And these are almost kind of you don't have to guess and actually where people prefer to live. And actually Victorian-style housing turned out to be the most popular, and it is actually the most sustainable in terms of fitting and refitting. And so on and so forth. I just want to show what this means in practice. I'll go through this very quickly because I don't have much time. This is a project we've been involved with because we have to actually put our money where our mouth is. This is a urban design project as well as an architectural project for my office, where we won this as a competition to build a complex outside of well, it's not a complex, actually a neighborhood outside of Paris in Ceris. The scheme provides about 127 apartments in a mid-rise, high-density environment with streets around it and a square in the center, 12 houses, and almost 40% affordable housing built by French developers to market value and sub-market, obviously, for the social tenants. It is a joint venture between Disney and also the developer. And you can see, really, these are houses which are recognizable as houses. They're walkable neighborhoods. The limit is about 4 stories or 5 stories maximum in certain places. There is green, and it is an environment which is familiar to the people who live and work around the area. The other 2 things I need to mention very quickly is the organizations that I represent as a trustee. One is the International Network of Traditional Building Architecture and Urbanism. We're an education charity where we try to basically promote the ideas that I've been talking about in different parts of the world. We are a network of about 5,000 people in 18 countries, from Nigeria to India and the United States. We have projects in different parts of the world. This is the latest one which I was involved with, which is a future-proofing of a city in India, Alua, which is going through rapid urbanization. India is one of the places where I think the next huge growth in urban population will happen. And we created stakeholder program where they could actually participate. And we're hoping this is not just about slum upgrade, this is actually about creating new parts of towns where new metropolitan centers are being created outside of existing cities. It's quite an ambitious plan for the next 20 years of Alua, and it is about preserving culture, it's about preserving the greenery, it's about continuing local building traditions, thereby continuing local employment, it's about familiarity. The modus operandi is to build the Chinese ghost cities that we were talked about today as being something which may be politically favorable, where they just build about 50 or 60 tower blocks and they just sit empty for ages because nobody likes to live in them. The other InPower project is about rehabilitations of in different parts of India. There was a project in Pune, and then also Mumbai Mills, which is a large industrial complex which was converted to housing. And the other organization which I represent is the Princess Foundation. Princess Foundation is really a charity which is solely to do with building community and the built environment, and leads by examples. The Prince of Wales has put his money and his effort and his love where his mouth is, and there are several projects. One is the Poundbury, which I encourage you to look at on a website, which is a new community created along the lines of the principles that I mentioned to you. We do research, international programs, education, so it's a holistic approach to building communities and building community capital. where people come from all sorts of different diverse backgrounds in order to create these places. And the programs and projects is as far away places as Jamaica, the Galapagos, Poundbury obviously is something that's happening in the UK, and I think that's me, I'm done. Thank you very much.